Welcome to episode 3 of recommending you nonfiction books based on popular fiction books. If you're new here, I'm Heather, and I started this series to sort of bridge nonfiction and fiction for people who might be looking to get into nonfiction more but don't really know where to start. I find that nonfiction is a little overwhelming for people, and they're never quite sure what they're going to like or not like. When I was first getting into nonfiction, I used fiction as a way to pick what topics I was going to read about and figure out what I was going to find interesting. I find that for me, it makes fiction reading a little bit deeper and more enjoyable to find themes and maybe plot points inside the book and figure out whether or not those things happened, whether there's more nonfiction that fits that theme, or just different ways to connect the stories. So the book we're going to be talking about today is Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wange. There are 200 million themes in this book. I loved that book. That is not a criticism of the book. I think that it just tackles the monumental thing that is colonialism, and that comes with a lot of extra topics involved because colonialism is not just one thing. It's a lot of micro things all working together. So there's a lot packed into that book. It was very hard to narrow down. I did only pick 3, but I might do a part 2 of this. Let me know in a comment if you want a part 2 because I will do one. I have a lot of suggestions, but these are the 3 that I came up with. The first book that we're going to talk about is The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. This was one that I could not stop thinking about while reading Blood Over Brighthaven. Part of the reason is because we obviously have the separation, like the physical separation of the wall from the outside community, the people who live in the Blight. But even inside the city, the survivors, the immigrants essentially, from the Blight, once they make it into the city, they are stuck in a separate section. It is not illegal for them to live somewhere else, but the only thing accessible to them is that one area of town. And it made me think about this book a lot because the subject of this book is how systemic segregation has been from the point of powers, like the way that the law in the United States was shaped to keep people segregated, and just the thousands of different little ways that institutionally we've segregated our land. This book is just so good. It's so informative. And it was just one that I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't get it out of my head as I was reading Blood Over Brighthaven. So I definitely think there are worthwhile things that you would probably find interesting if that was a theme that you connected with in that story. Okay. Number 2 is going a little off the rails, but that is How to Change Minds by David McCraney. The reason that I chose this one is for a few different reasons. One is because it's an easy first nonfiction to read. If you have not done much nonfiction reading, it's short, the writing is good, it's snappy to get through. It's not in a lot to tackle all at once. The second thing is that one of the main things that has to happen in this book for Sayonara, our main character, to actually take the actions that she did and move forward is that her mind had to be changed. Tamil is kind of placed with the responsibility of doing that, which is a whole other conversation we could have, and maybe I'll save that for a part 2. But Tamil has taken on the responsibility of doing that, of challenging her education, challenging how she thinks, challenging her religion. And how do you actually go about doing that in real life? How do you have a conversation in a way that you can actually change someone's mind? So the point of How to Change People's Mind by David McCraney is looking at the research-backed evidence of the ways that you can have a conversation with people about difficult topics and actually change their mind. And one of the things that they talk a lot about in this book is the reversal of gay marriage being illegal, and then now it's obviously legal. I understand there's a lot of complications right at this exact moment with that topic. However, it is currently and presently legal. And that was actually a really fast societal change. It was not fast as in it was illegal for not a very long time. What I mean by that is the sentiment from being against gay marriage to being pro-legal gay marriage. That actually was a very truncated amount of time that society took to shift. And they credit this one specific institution with doing a lot of research and on-the-ground work to get it passed in California and then upheld across the nation. So if you're reading this book and you're thinking to yourself, okay, but we can't actually change people's mind on our day-to-day, and like, how do you actually turn that into action? This is a really great place to start. Book number 3 is The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. I just finished this recently myself, and it really deals with disinformation and the whitewashing of historical narratives. And I think that's important to Blood Over Brighthaven, and maybe something you want to dig in further after reading that book, because it is so central in that book. Like, the elimination of Tamils peoples' point of view in history was integral to setting up the system that ended up dominating and decimating them. The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States centers an Indigenous point of view and centers the Indigenous perspective on the founding of America and our history since. I think it's a good book to pair with Blood Over Brighthaven because colonialism is the kind of overarching theme of the book. How eliminating Tamils people's point of view from history was integral for them being able to set up the structures that ultimately decimated them. So I think that's probably one of the best ones. If you only take one recommendation, I would do that book. I just also think it's incredibly important to read if you live in the United States, especially. If you're not quite ready to jump into nonfiction reading, there is a documentary called Exterminate All the Brutes, which the main subject matter they focus on in this book is sourced from the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. They use a few other sources. It's not fully like a full film adaptation of, or full like documentary adaptation of that book, but the author mentions it in her foreword to the most recent edition of this book. I have not watched it yet, but just from that recommendation alone, I feel like that's pretty high praise if the author is highlighting, a documentary that's made from this as source material. So it is on my list. It is on my list to watch, but if you're just looking to maybe expand on the theme, but you don't really want to pick up a nonfiction book, that is a documentary option that exists. Like I said, there is literally an infinite amount of books I feel like I could suggest from this book alone. It just really does tackle a lot. If you've never read Blood Over Brighthaven, I highly suggest it. But if you have other books that you picked up because of Blood Over Brighthaven or you think might link up a little bit better, feel free to leave them in the comments, and then maybe I'll do a part 2.